Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Park Cruising: What Happens When We Wander Off the Path by Marcus McCann. Narrated by Daniel Henning. We are leaf-whelmed somewhere with the hood of some branchy, bunchy, bushy bowered wood. Gerald Manley Hopkins, Epithalamion. Here is adhesiveness. It is not previously fashioned, it is apropos. Do you know what it is as you pass to be loved by strangers? Walt Whitman, Song of the Open Road. Introduction by way of a question about pleasure. The windows fogged up as people crowded into Glad Day Bookshop on December 13, 2016. Glad Day, a queer and trans bookstore, bar, and event space, had just moved into its street-level location at 499 Church Street that fall. The look was scrappy and unfinished. Two large bookcases on wheels, always teetering on the verge of falling over, had been rolled back from the center of the store to make room for a few dozen chairs. The light was dim. Pop songs played in the background. The meeting had been convened following the revelation that in October and November, Toronto police had raided a forest and parking lot used for cruising at Marie Curtis Park. Police had dubbed the undercover sting operation Project Marie, a moniker slightly feminizing and homophobic. All told, it netted at least 72 men. The meeting was packed, standing room only. After sharing what we knew so far, people were invited to break into small circles to talk about how we could respond, whether it was through letter writing, legal challenges, or art. Andrew Woodrow Butcher, a bearish ginger with a sharp mustache, stood to give his report from one of these groups. In his recounting of their discussion, he asked rhetorically of the raids, "Why is pleasure superfluous?" In our work opposing Project Marie, it became clear that there was a baseline problem. The popular imagination did not have language to articulate anything resembling a defense of cruising. I take Woodrow Butcher's question to mean, why is there no accounting for the fact that the police crackdown was not conducted against something bad, some danger, or even something neutral, but rather against something pleasurable? Something that is lovely and affirming and has value. The same problem exists in the legal context. Cases from the last 40 years rarely consider sexual expression valuable and worth protecting. Sex is only ever a problem. It is dangerous, harmful, risky. The law does not have language that accounts for park cruising as something that might contain elements of social good. This book began as a collection of essays on legal topics, but it was drawn off course by trying to articulate some of these elements. At the risk of disappointing the spirit of José Esteban Muñoz, who wrote that books of criticism that simply glamorize the ontology of gay male cruising are more often than not simply boring, I describe some of the social goods that can come from cruising. As Gail Rubin wrote, "A democratic morality should judge sexual acts by the way partners treat one another, the level of mutual consideration, the presence or absence of coercion, and the quantity and quality of the pleasure they provide." I take seriously Rubin's invitation to consider non-normative sexual practices outside of the stigma they sometimes engender. I've been thinking and writing about state regulation of sexuality for almost 20 years. I began my professional life as a journalist, working as, among other things, the managing editor of the gay and lesbian newspaper, Extra. Now that I'm a lawyer, I often find myself involved in cases in which the realities of law and policing chafe against the values Rubin articulates. I've litigated cases related to sex work, sexual health education, HIV non-disclosure, and online activism. My involvement in opposing Project Marie as a lawyer and as an activist organizer with Queers Crash the Beat is described in greater detail in these chapters. Park cruising is a site of identity formation. It can reduce loneliness and the attendant risks that come with isolation. It is a site of the distribution of safer sex material, and in the age of COVID-19, it reduces the spread of airborne pathogens among sexual partners. It takes place away from commercial spaces, and people don't need money to engage in it. It can lend distinctiveness to a place and become a source of tourism. It teaches people valuable lessons about sexual consent, and yes, it is a source of pleasure and world building. Conscientious park cruising can help participants grow more caring. Of course, this book does not lose sight of the legal side of things. As a lawyer, I was trained to look at statutes and judges' decisions to find out what the law is and what it means. Criminal code provisions are defined when appropriate, and the law of indecency is described. But dry and brittle cases are only so much paper. They do not really tell the full story of the state's relationship to park cruising. These essays focus not on the courtroom but on what precedes it, the habits of the cruiser, police and policing, municipal land use and zoning, and the surrounding social circumstances of cruising. As Steve Ruzhitsky has pointed out, there is a symbiotic relationship between the park cruiser and the police cruiser. Looking closely at park cruising tells us not just about the former, but also a surprising amount about the latter. The logic of these essays could be applied to other non-normative sexual activities, hustling, say, or BDSM, or polyamory, or bathhouse culture. But this book focuses on park cruising. Returning to the cache of sex-positive writing of the 1980s and 1990s, I was struck by how much of the writing about public sex was actually about sex clubs, bathhouses, dark rooms, porn theaters, video booths, BDSM spaces, privately owned commercial indoor venues rather than public parks and other non-commercial outdoor spaces. I don't think there's anything sinister in this. Sex in bathhouses or video booths is probably more interesting from an academic point of view, in that it shows the definitional difficulties of public and private and illuminates in a direct way the concept of liminal space. Some of the central texts of the period were also created out of political necessity, a desire to save the bars and bathhouses from wave after wave of peril, first from police and organized crime, then from campaigns to shutter the clubs as a public health response to AIDS, and then in reaction to efforts to zone sexually explicit businesses out of cities. The terms cruising and public sex are often used synonymously, but that's not quite right. Cruising is a way of looking, a way of making yourself available to meeting people. The natural corollary is that cruising is also a way of being seen. When people cruise in parks, they're using coded signs, loitering, prolonged eye contact, a strategic tug, to indicate sexual availability. The sex that follows, if it follows, can take place anywhere, in the park, a bathroom, a car, someone's home. The academic Leo Bersani once described cruising as sexual sociability, which is partway there. For me, at least, the defining characteristic of cruising is its porousness. Cruisers show deliberate vulnerability towards strangers. They develop an alertness to the way other people, very often people outside of their ordinary social worlds, are thinking and feeling in any particular moment. Most cruisers would be hesitant to describe these as social or emotional skills, but that is just what they are, and they're powerful and underused, both in and out of the sexual milieu. Sex in a park does not have to be sex with a stranger. 2 or more people can go to a park together, find a quiet corner, and get busy. Straight people do it all the time, on a blanket in the park after sunset, in the backseat of a car in a lot overlooking a ravine. And when they do, it's considered a harmless lover's lane scenario. If found, the couple may be told to knock it off or move along, but there are rarely harsher consequences. This variety of non-anonymous park sex, queer or straight, is performed out of necessity, sure, but also just for fun. In an episode of Audio Sex Party, a podcast that brings groups of queer and trans guys together for drinks and conversation about sex, one partygoer recounts that he and his ex would meet and hang out, but rather than have sex at his apartment, they would sometimes go to a wooded area in a nearby cruising park. There, they would have sex with each other, semi-privately, but in public. The opposite is also true, of course. Strangers cruise each other in public, leading to sex in private. This frequently happens during bar cruising. Although sex can happen on-site, at bars and nightclubs, people of all orientations pick someone up and take them home to continue the party. Where useful, I've drawn from these overlapping activities: park sex that isn't related to cruising, and cruising that isn't related to parks, but all with the goal of illuminating the book's main subject. There's no doubt that when it comes to park cruising, we are living in an interesting cultural moment. Today's park cruising takes place in the shadows of the city planning nightmares Lauren Berlant and Michael Warner and Samuel R. Delaney warned about 25 years ago. In Toronto, where I live, the unrestricted escalation of commercial rents, created by permissive government policies, has led many queer and sex-positive establishments to shut their doors. One block at a time, quirky neighborhoods are torn down and replaced with hastily constructed glass condo buildings. This is partly stirred by an interpretation of the term highest and best use at the Ontario Municipal Board, now replaced by the Ontario Land Tribunal, which is taken to mean solely highest economic value. Sex clubs and gay bars could never show that they generated enough economic activity to be the footprint's most lucrative use, and no glass tower would put a bathhouse on its ground floor when it could lease the space to Starbucks or the running room. With each bathhouse and nightclub closure, it was understood that the municipal government would not grant a permit to open a new one somewhere else. Freezing the availability of permits seems to be an official strategy for keeping seedy or disreputable businesses to a minimum. For example, the city has not increased the number of body rub parlor licenses since 1975, when the number was capped at 25. Even ordinary bars have faced pushback from the City of Toronto since it zoned the old warehouse district south of Queen Street the Entertainment District and began refusing to issue licenses to new dance clubs elsewhere. In the face of a weakening commercial sex culture, a particular combination of technology and practice theoretically provided an answer. People could find each other online and then meet for sex in their own homes. But Grindr is not for everyone, and there have been well-documented critiques of the app as time-wasting, racist, body-shaming, corporate, and cruel. This sex culture, too, is affected by economic realities. Residential rental prices reached truly obscene rates prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and house prices were just as bad. The result has been to put downtown living out of reach for many working and middle-class folks, and to force those who do live downtown to put up with cramped and crowded accommodation. The idea that people can arrange for sex in their homes is undercut when 3 people have to share a 1-bedroom-plus condo where the second and third person's bedroom is an open space that would ordinarily be a den or breakfast nook. The parks provide an alternative to all of this. I can't say for certain whether park cruising is gaining or losing popularity. No bouncers stand outside the bushes with a clicker, keeping track of capacity. But parks have been extraordinarily busy during the COVID pandemic, with an uptick in all kinds of uses. I can report that in this context, parks in Toronto continue to be sites of pleasure and exchange, including sexual pleasure and sexual exchange. Park cruising is a lot older than most people think. Michael Rock has written about street cruising in 15th century Florence. Neil Bartlett records an example of cruising told as witness testimony from a trial in London in 1742. Walt Whitman cruised New York in the 19th century. It turns out that park cruising long predates the invention of a homosexual identity in the 1860s. Similarly, park cruising does not take place exclusively in Western Europe and North America. Academic works in the last 20 years have described cruising in parks around the world. In Joubert Park, in Johannesburg, South Africa, for example, its use by gay men was shaped by the distinctive features of South African apartheid. The city's inability to police the bustling working-class park and surrounding streets meant that authorities could not police racial segregation, and the area became a site of interracial and inter-class sexual contact, according to Jonathan Kane. Waves of illegal activities, prostitution, drugs, violence, made Joubert Park a sometimes hospitable, sometimes inhospitable site of cruising. In contrary to park cruising elsewhere, sexual contact is made but rarely consummated in People's Park, in Guangzhou, China, according to a study by Zhengxi Chan. Long, exposed rows of formal benches make meeting people possible, but the very same architecture makes sex there impractical. Prostitution here has a different relationship to cruising, helping create an economy that supports 2-hour and 3-hour hotel rentals at the outskirts of the park. Cruising in People's Park is therefore shaped by geography mediated through culture. The austere civic infrastructure of the park and the availability of rooms at surrounding hotels. Park cruising looks very different again in South India, with significant variation in cruising practices between the cities of Mysuru, Belgaum, and Ballari, according to Robert Lorway and his fellow researchers. The way in which cruisers approach each other and interact is governed by deeply embedded gender codes among participants, codes that do not map neatly onto the gender codes of Western Europe. Park cruising can be socially sanctioned, and much of the cruising and flirting happens in groups, in contrast to the Western stereotype of the solitary cruiser. Because many queer and trans people live with their biological families, festivals are important opportunities for park cruising, periods in which people can be away from their families overnight or for days on end without moral opprobrium or interrogation upon their return. This book is not a thesis and exposition. It is a way of looking at a phenomenon that is usually only glanced obliquely. Each of the following essays takes an aspect of park cruising as its topic: pleasure and world-building, non-participants, public health, Project Marie, municipal planning, the law of indecency, consent, shame, violence, and the possibility of legal reform. Within most of the essays, I try to answer a first-level question in the beginning of the essay, and then I try to ask, what does what it means mean? Are there any second-order insights to be gleaned? As a result, the essays sometimes wander off the main path, a structure that bears a certain resemblance to park cruising itself. Political writing about sexuality often assumes that those who disagree are prudish, stupid, or evil, sometimes all three. I've tried to avoid this pitfall, and to the extent I've been successful, this book is indebted to the deep currents of empathy in work by writers like Ivan Coyote, S. Bear Bergman, and Kai Cheng Tom. This trans-literature of empathy has taught me that worlds open up if a writer can take a fierce and terrifying step away from mere anger and toward understanding. I've tried as much as possible to take a non-judgmental attitude toward the characters who are described and, when I can, to assume good intentions. Empathy also means introspection and self-empathy from time to time, skills I've tried to deploy, with varying degrees of success, to my own limitations as I wrote these essays. I'm grateful to Lee Nash and House of Anansi Press for taking a chance on this collection of essays. Thank you to Paul Sutton, who listened to many of these ideas when they were only half-baked. Thank you to Andrew Faulkner, who helped me escape the narrow ways lawyers are expected to write about law and foreground the human aspects of these stories. I'm grateful for the support of those who were in my life as I worked on park cruising: Carly Boyce, Julia Sinclair Palm, Colin Zavitz, Jose Boras, Aaron Secord, Lucy Capiello, and Angela Chiasson in particular. Thank you to Kira Lynn Federber for inspiring and lending their careful eye to the essay on non-participants. I'm grateful for the research assistance provided by Elsa Asensio and Nicole Din, and to the Queers Crash the Beat crew, including Makiki, Lisa Amin, Anthea Black, Michael Holmes, Joshua Shaw, and especially Jonathan Vallely, who also helped fact-check the book. The love I have felt while working on this project has been warm, diffuse, interwoven, and at times, blindingly bright. 1,000 luminous threads. Biking east, away from downtown, away from the touristic promenade at Queen's Quay, where cyclists dodge families even in the bike lanes, the scenery suddenly changes. Out past the Redpath Sugar Refinery, you can bike to the spot where the Don Valley Parkway meets the elevated Gardner, two of Toronto's busiest highways. You slip away from the city's tall buildings, and the sightline moves from vertical to horizontal, from portrait to landscape. It is unsettling, almost as if something has fallen over. The dust in the air tastes like concrete powder. Giant holes are being dug behind metal fences. This in-between space, the Portlands, will be another outpost of condos, a planned neighborhood soon enough. It is already changing. But for now, if you turn away from the elbow of highway and head toward Lake Ontario, the view is still overwhelmingly horizontal. You will pass a collection of wide, low-slung, semi-industrial sites. A stench rises from the GFL Unwin transfer system, a garbage dump. But mercifully, the winds carry the smell away, so it is only really overpowering directly in front of it, and then, after, it's easy to forget. The main road into the Portlands dead ends in a traffic circle. There's a parking lot, a low administrative building, a chip truck, and then, spreading out on either side, yellow sand and the lake. This is Cherry Beach. Is there a gay end of Cherry Beach? I ask, first directing the question to acquaintances, then to strangers on Grindr. Yes and no, it turns out. Like almost every beach in the world, if you walk to the end and keep walking, that's where you'll find it. At Cherry Beach, through the stand of trees at the eastern tip of the main park, past the next little crescent of sand, and the next crescent after that, then, yes, at the far, far end, there's a little patch where queer and trans people tend to gather. But attendance is spotty, and at Cherry Beach, we are not the intimidating crowd found at more popular scenes. I bike there on a Tuesday in August, the second day of 2 weeks blocked off on my office calendar. I learned not to say I'm on vacation because I haven't left the city. I say, I'm off work for 2 weeks and just bumming around. After locking up my bike, I walk the length of the main beach, casually scanning, and then walk it a second time. I post up at the easternmost tip on the fingernail-shaped third inlet. From my backpack, I pull a bedsheet, larger and lighter than a towel or blanket, an apple, a tall can of Bud Light strawberry lemonade, sunscreen, my reading glasses, and Mariana Valverde's The Age of Light, Soap and Water, Moral Reform in English Canada, 1885 to 1925. I take off my shirt, shorts, and socks and stuff them in my backpack. Although I'm not going into the lake, I wear a tiny swimsuit. And there, I spend the next 2 hours, my attention swaying gently between the handful of people on the beach around me, men on Grindr messaging me through spotty cell service, and Valverde's book, which I finish with satisfaction. There are profound discontinuities between the age of purity and the present day, she concludes, which can be contrasted with continuities in popular fears of a national decay rooted in sexual decadence. I put down the book. After a couple of Grindr conversations that go nowhere, and perhaps with a little courage from the beer, I decide to find the forested area where men cruise. There's another little dead-end street, Regatta Road. Cruising happens near there, and I know it is a popular spot. It is further east than where I am, but I don't know how far or exactly where. Behind the beach, and behind the beach's parking lot, a paved bike path snakes away through the trees that lead to the Leslie Street spit. The path crosses Regatta Road, and on either side of the path, the bushes are lushly overgrown, deep and bright green, and completely opaque. I bike aimlessly up and down the path, peering into the trees for some hint that the area is used for cruising. I see nothing. Eventually, I give up looking for confirmation. I pick a wooded spot north and east of where I had been sunning myself. I dismount and push my bike through the greenery, through bushes, past the first big trees, and into a clearing under the canopy. I don't see any people, but there is evidence of human activity, and I decide to sit on a log for a moment and, I don't know, pretend to catch my breath. It is 3:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, 30 degrees Celsius, and the sun is lighting up the greenery with an incandescent glow. A middle-aged man of indeterminate orientation appears at the edge of the clearing and wanders up and over a little hill and out of sight. I see him for perhaps 10 seconds. Another man appears, this one wearing basketball shorts and a leather chest harness, and I'm reasonably sure I'm in the right place. He lingers on a path that leads off to I don't know where. He looks at me and waits for what seems like an eternity, probably 15 or 20 seconds, but without receiving encouragement, he turns down the forested trail and out of view. Over the little rolling hill, I hear voices and some kind of rustling. I want to investigate, but I've not locked up my bike. I find myself walking away from my bike, but keeping it in the periphery of my vision, wandering 20 or 30 feet down one path or another before turning back. After tugging at the end of this invisible tether for a while, I reluctantly lock up my bike loosely to a tree trunk and turn to the paths. I'm still leery of wandering too far. If I get turned around, I have no idea if I'll be able to find my way back. Over the crest of the little knoll, a man jogs toward me. Roughly 5'7", with a crew cut, he wears black shorts and sneakers. He doesn't seem to have any belongings with him. He's not wearing a shirt or carrying one. Our eyes meet. I walk a little ahead and pause. When I turn around, he has also stopped, half jogging in place. We allow this tableau to linger, and then slowly, he approaches. Tom, he will later tell me his name, starts to lead me further into the bushes. Wait, I say, embarrassed. I tell him I don't want to stray too far from my bike, that I might get lost. Don't worry, he says. I'll bring you back here after. He has a gentle, tentative manner, and I allow myself to be sweet-talked. He takes me somewhere we can be a little more private, which, it turns out, is more difficult than it sounds. Wandering the bushes are various men who are looking for sex, but would apparently settle for watching Tom and me. We kiss. Our hands explore each other's bodies. In moments, when we're alone, we briefly go further. But when we see someone approaching, Tom's little jogging shorts slide back up over his butt. We try 3 or 4 different semi-secluded locations, but the area is too busy for the more sustained privacy Tom wants, or thinks that I want. Grinning but self-conscious, we give up. Tom takes me back to my bike. As we walk back, he tells me a little about the geography of the bushes, giving advice about where I can lock my bike and the best times of day for cruising here. This isn't even the main cruising area, he says. Do you want to see the rest of it? I could be your tour guide. I agree, and he leads me a little further east. There's a shady gully, and then another, and then a patch about 60 by 60 feet of tall yellow grass with paths and dead ends cut into it. It feels like a corn maze. We continue to see strangers, perhaps 40 between our earlier dalliance and this guided tour. When Tom and I say goodbye, it is with a little stutter, both of us awkward because the social expectations are unclear. I turned.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?